the context behind this interview, this is BCC Library's 10-year anniversary. It's an oral history event centered around the college. The North Holland Library's groundbreaking occurred at October 21st, 2008. It took 12 years of funding and finished construction in 2012. We are now in 2022, a whole decade later. Yeah, since then, many students, staff, and faculty have educated within these halls, but this is a 21st century building. It was actually the first building that was constructed since BCC moved to the University Heights campus in 1973. So with that context out of the way, I want to know more about you. Can you introduce yourself and where you're from and how you got into the college?
Sure. So my name is Emma Antobam-Ntekudzi, and I'm currently a reference and instruction librarian at Bronx Community College. I'm born and raised in Queens, New York, and I currently reside in New Jersey, but I still consider myself a New Yorker always. Now, how I came to Bronx Community College, I've been here consecutively since 2017, since September 2017. However, I was here before that. My first time coming to the college was in 2014. I came in, I think, January of that year, and I came in as a substitute instructor for 1 year. So I was here from January 2014 until I guess about the end of that year. And then I moved on to a SUNY college. So that was my first introduction to this place. So I got to see this place for the first time not that long after it had been finished being built, since the construction ended in 2012 and I arrived 2 years later. Then after I left in 2015 for SUNY, I stayed at SUNY for about 2.5 years and then came back here at BCC in a full-time and permanent capacity. However, in between those years, while I still worked at SUNY full-time, I did continue to maintain a relationship with Bronx Community College Library as an adjunct librarian, working just a couple of weekends a month, I think maybe 2 weekends a month. We rotated at the time weekend dates with other weekend adjuncts at that time. So that's it. That's where I grew up, and then how I got to BCC.
I'd like to hear more about your educational journey. So starting even before you began your work as an adjunct and teaching students, did you always, was your bachelor's more involved in education? Have you always identified that as part of your career journey?
No. I have a few of my friends, we used to say, for some of us, we end up becoming a librarian like by accident. And that's not a bad thing. That's just an experience for some people. And I feel like that was also an experience for me. I wouldn't say by accident, but I would say maybe it wasn't a passion growing up. Growing up, I didn't think of this as a field to go into just because it wasn't on my radar. And the education that I received did not revolve around education. So I attended all public schools in my formative years. And then when it came to college, it was a no-brainer. I was going to CUNY, and I wanted to go to CUNY. I went to Queens College, and I did my bachelor's in English, and I didn't know what to do with it. And at that time, While I was finishing my bachelor's, I worked I worked at QCC. I worked at QC, excuse me. I worked at Queens College Library. And I started off as a volunteer in the acquisitions department. And I remember I just needed a job. Like it was my very first, I had experienced my first winter intercession at college, and it was too much time. I mean, we literally have like a month off and a month off in January, pretty much, and you have time off in December. I didn't know what to do at that time. So I always loved reading. And so I gravitated towards working in a library, and I couldn't find any kind of volunteer work at my local library, which would be our Queens Public Library System. I live by the main branch, so I thought it would be convenient if I found some volunteer work in the library, you know, at my college, which I fortunately did. So I started off in the acquisitions department as a student aide, as a volunteer, and then I became a student aide, making $5.15 an hour back then. Back then, which seems so crazy now. It's not raised all that much anyway, but but I remember that. And I remember the disappointment of my supervisor at that time, because that's what she told me she'd have to pay me. And I was just so excited because I'm like, I'm getting a job and I don't have to be home all day. And then from there, I moved on from working in the acquisitions department to the administration office in the library. And then that's where I stayed working while I was finishing up my bachelor's degree at Queens College, again in English. And when I finished that degree, as I mentioned before, I didn't know what to do with it. But by then I had a rapport with some of the librarians at Queens College, as well as a friend who worked at Queens College. She was staff and she was going for her library degree as well. And then she eventually began working as a librarian herself. And so that all influenced me to just go to library school, which is conveniently located on the lower level of Queens College Library. That's kind of how I became, that's kind of how my education worked into getting me to become a librarian. I guess by proximity, it worked out that way.
And it was their influence. Was it more of a mentorship, or did they just tell you, like, because I also went into library science. I studied at Queens College. It's a very helpful environment. Like, how did they get you to realize that this was like a path forward?
I would say yes to mentorship. It was informal mentorship from my friends, and then also some of the librarians there who were working there. And I guess like they convinced me into seeing that one, it's a profession with a lot of different options within it. You know, at that time, I didn't know what kind of librarian I could be. I didn't know what being a librarian entailed. So I was able to kind of get more feedback about what that work was like from librarians at QC at that time, and also my friend who was going through the program while she was working at QC as well. So that's really how it, you know, they convinced me to start doing that. And then I also understood my comfort level, and I'd been working in a library for a long time. I liked working in libraries, and it felt kind of natural to continue that path. We now know not everyone who gets an MLS ends up working in a library, because there are information specialist positions everywhere that require a library degree. But it just seemed natural at that time. I understood, once I get this degree, I can then begin working as a librarian. And I was convinced that it would be a profession that I'd like to start out my my life with and see how far it goes.
And as you were in school, your continued education, you of course took electives. You met with other students. Like, is there any specific form? Uh, did you consider like early childhood education libraries? Did you always think like I have the most experience with college libraries? I want to stick to that.
Um, as I got into it, I had decided to go for the general public librarianship. I wasn't, I can't say that I was very much interested in specializing in anything. I did try going for the archival certificate, but it wasn't something that I was very much interested in. While I completely respected and actually enjoyed some of my archiving classes, I knew it just wasn't my thing. Um, I did take some electives for YA. Um, and I also came to learn that that was not my thing either. So I just knew I was going to I knew I would do the public librarianship certificate and then just figure out like, what librarian positions I could get from there, whether it was in a college library or not. I later on, when I finished my degree, I I pretty much applied everywhere when I finished my degree. I did certainly apply to academic librarianship positions a lot. Um, and yeah, I remember applying a lot to academic librarian positions, but I applied to other library jobs as well. And during that time, while I was finishing my library degree, I was still working in a library, but I wasn't at QC library anymore. I was no longer working in an academic library. I was now in a special library. I worked at the New York Botanical Garden Library. And that showed me kind of the world of special libraries, which was pretty cool. But I did apply to a large amount of academic librarian positions while I was working at the New York Botanical Garden. And I just, I was waiting to see, it felt like being in a waiting room. I was just waiting to see what I had enough experience with, who would hire me, that sort of thing.
So these questions are going to transition more to the personal and the emotional. Like, how did this journey, both in your education and your work, shape your identity as you grew into it?
Um, I feel like it's looking back, um, my education and this work that I do has kind of helped with defining my defining or maybe realizing what it is I enjoy doing, which is helping people. And this is a different way to help people directly in their personal lives. Um, and so I derive a lot of joy from being able to do that. Um, and I'm extremely grateful for being able to learn from others as I continue doing this work and being involved in this profession, specifically with academic librarianship, because you do get to work with a lot of students one-on-one. I remember I did also work with I work with the special populations when I worked at New York Botanical Garden, and that's a whole, a whole different feeling. But it's a way of helping people there too, providing information access to folks, and then also kind of opening people's minds to what literature is out there on the topics that they're interested in, or the research or helping people finish their research, which I didn't even realize back when I was working at the Botanical Garden. I didn't realize how important that was until like researcher so kindly like mentioned me and one of the librarians in their thank you notes. And I just thought, oh my God, I just got the book, off the shelf. I was a library assistant at that time at New York Botanical Garden. And I just remember thinking, I just got the book off the shelf and then made them some copies and sent it off. And they're so grateful for it because it just meant so much to them that they received this and they could finish out their work. So, I mean, it's influenced me in understanding how the little things can mean a lot to people in moments. And it's kind of those moments that people remember. So I enjoy the work for that aspect. And I think the education kind of prepares you to provide that level of support to others.
And now that you're at BCC, there's a change of environment, a change of responsibilities. Like, does this continue to affect you in the same way, or how have you grown and sort of metabolized your identity around this?
I think it's affected me in the same way, and it's just kind of evolved into just kind of like there's a level of confidence that does come from working in any profession after a certain amount of time. And it feels good to be at a level where I am at a point where I do feel like I just have those skills that can do as much for the students here as possible. I also have been able to cultivate my patience, with students. I'm a pretty patient person anyway, but in general, I have a better understanding of the necessity of being patient with the students that I end up working with. And then kind of also reading between the lines with students. It's not just about giving them information or helping them find resources. There's also an understanding of where they're coming from, how I can better meet them where they are. And that's something that amplified during quarantine when COVID-19 began. Because prior to that, students came to us. And so unless they shared information with us about their background or what was going on with them, which they routinely did, at least with me, unless they did that prior to, you didn't know what was going on. And then when we began working with students in this forum through Zoom, one-on-one, then you got to see just what was going on, like at home, what barriers they had. You always read about like the barriers that marginalized groups encounter, especially students coming from those communities. But reading about it and seeing it are two different things. And so there's a lot more empathy that comes out. There's more understanding that you kind of naturally begin to feel for the students. So I think working here over time, and also working in other libraries as well, with working at SUNY, I also worked with a similar demographic of students, which actually surprised me. Most of the students that I did work with at that SUNY college did come from the Bronx, as well as like the Westchester area. But working with students from these communities does kind of has allowed me to bring in a much more understanding and empathy into the role that I played, which I may not have had as much of when I first began. And while the education prepares you to kind of give people stuff or to kind of search for things for people, working with the population or working with this population helps bring in kind of care ethics into the work that I do. So I feel like that's how being here has shaped me.
This is actually a perfect segue to the next set of questions. Both of them are very open-ended, so it is more of a sort of a metaphysical or like the Platonic vision you have for what academic librarianship is. I was curious, and especially when considering having to practice sort of critical engagement with students, practicing empathy, what did you perceive academic librarianship was like before BCC, even before your formal education in the topic? And now that you're within like in higher education, librarianship, especially your role, like how has your idea of academic librarianship, that vision, sort of transmogrified?
Before coming into academic librarianship, it was such a mystery to me. When I was at Queens College, I personally didn't consult a librarian often. Yeah, I would say very rarely did I consult did I consult with a librarian for anything. And I think part of that was because I didn't fully understand the role of what a librarian was going to do for me while I was a student. Looking back with what I know now, I would have utilized the librarians more so at that time. So the idea of the librarians being in the college library, what that work was like, it was opaque to me. I wasn't sure what that was about. And then going through the MLS program, at the time, I think now the program has been updated and revamped. But when I attended, there wasn't a focus on academic librarianship. At the time, I don't remember if there was an elective for academic librarianship when I went, but whether there was or wasn't, I didn't take it. And so academic librarianship continued to kind of be a bit of a mystery to me, but I understood the concept of supporting the patrons. And in this case, your patrons are your students. And so you are supporting them with whatever those needs are. And so it was all very unclear to me about what academic librarianship actually was. And then when I began applying for jobs and you see the job description, then I got to understand, oh, so these are some of the duties of academic librarianship, which I felt at the time, I mean, it was all very scary. It was all very intimidating. I'm like, I got to know databases, so at the time I had just finished the degree, and even though I had the degree, I wasn't confident. And I remember my boss at the time at New York Botanical Garden, I said, I don't know. I haven't done any of these things. I just have this degree, and the work I do here, it's kind of like maybe staff work. It's not because I'm staff, I'm doing staff work. I don't know if I can do this stuff. And my boss, he just said, you have the degree, right? And I said, yes. And he said, that's it. Just apply. You have the degree, you qualify. Apply for all these jobs, even if you don't know what some of these duties are and you haven't been exposed to them yet. So I did. And so with academic librarianship, I got a glimpse of what the duties were when I started applying. So I really had no idea what it was about. Now being in it, because I didn't know what it was about at all, now being in it, I'm so much more comfortable with, comprehending the various duties that those of us in this position do. And I find a lot of comfort in it. It's something that like I've come to enjoy tackling. There's so much growth within academic librarianship. And there are avenues for you to kind of explore your interests within academic librarianship, which I don't know whether that's something that exists within other library positions outside of academia. And I think that has to do with just I think it has to do with academia in general. I think teaching faculty also experienced that ability to kind of, like go for grants for things that they're interested in, do their own research, and have time to be provided to do that research because it's required of them. And so for faculty at CUNY, it's required for us to do scholarship and to be part of committees. And then there's also the library effectiveness, which is the equivalent of teaching. So then there's those areas that we have to fulfill. And there's just so much that you can learn within this position while growing. And it's a complete 180 from not knowing anything, or just seeing academic librarians in their offices and just really not knowing what they do, to now fully understanding what the basic duties are, and then also the broader duties that we don't see, that patrons don't see, that students don't see. So that's kind of how my idea changed from knowing nothing to fully being immersed in academic librarianship and liking it.
Yeah, I remember when I used to think that someone just showed up with a pallet full of books, and that's how libraries got stocked.
Yeah, that's how we all thought.
So I want you to elaborate more on sort of those duties and that role. Like, how do you think, and you can bias it with your personal duties, or kind of just expand on what you think academic libraries do specifically, but how is that unique to special collections, to media libraries, or to public libraries? Like, how do academic libraries stand out with those duties?
I think they stand out in like unique ways. So with this position, you get to know a specific population really well, which is students. And depending on the college you work in, you're getting to know students who have students of varying ages, traditional and non-traditional students. At least that's my experience at a community college. My prior college at SUNY was not a community college. It was a 4-year. And there's certainly differences with students from a 4-year between 4-year and a 2-year. But still, you get to learn and you get to know about the students' interests. They just come from so many different backgrounds. It's exciting to learn from them. And while I understand other libraries will have their patrons that they, get to know as well, I just find that students are so dynamic and they're so resilient, and being able to work with them is always an honor. And then doing this work within, not dealing with the students, we have our own stuff to do, which is usually like special projects, which we get to decide what those special projects can be. So there's a lot of room for autonomy. There's a lot of room for collaboration within the library department in the academic library, as well as outside of the library department. So the university is part of a larger consortium, and librarians from other CUNYs are available for you to work with. And so I'm unsure if that exists with positions that are not academic librarian positions, or whether other libraries are part of consortiums, which does happen. But I can only speak to, my experience. And, just the ability to learn to do so many things. You can learn to do grant writing just by signing up for a grant. You can go for professional development that is required of you, so it's fun to do, but it's also something you have to do. And so you're constantly learning, and there's a serious emphasis on being professionally active. And that's such a huge help in any profession. The fact that it's a requirement, and that there's usually funds available for you to do that work in academia. And that's what I've experienced working in 2 different academic environments. I've come to see those things as kind of unique from perhaps other librarian positions.
Memories of Bronx Community College Library. So you said you got here 2 years after the completion of the North Hall. Did you have any experience kind of checking out Meister Hall? I'm not sure how long the transition was between, books being fed out of Meister Hall's like basement library to the new one.
So for me, I am not part of the group that experienced Meister Hall, experienced the library in Meister Hall, and then transitioned here. When I came, this place was already done, and 2 years in, I think if not all the material from Meister was already here, and the area where the library was had been redone and repurposed. So at that time, I did like get to know other buildings on campus, because I did do some teaching, library instruction teaching, for classes outside of the library. So sometimes the library room is booked. We only have one. And so sometimes it's unavailable. And most of us at that time are pretty flexible. And, if we could go to the classroom and do it, we would do it. If the classroom, was a lab, that's perfect. I don't think I've done it in a class where it wasn't already a lab. But that's how I came to know other buildings on campus. And that's also how I came to know Meister Hall. And then one of my colleagues, showed me the area where the library used to be. And I remember teaching a class in the area where the library used to be. It was repurposed for other things, but there was a section where classes could be taught, whether it was for faculty or students. So I remember seeing that area and just being, I guess, just thinking like, it's a good thing that they moved to this brand new building. And I just, was in shock that this one space kind of just held all the collection that, that I encountered when I came here. So I wish I had stories from like how it used to be to how it is now, but I don't know the Meister experience. When I did get here, I mean, the building is beautiful. It was just very striking. Gould Memorial was also very striking, and learning about the history of Gould Memorial, and then also its attachment to this building, and learning how this building came to be about, and understanding all the things that revolved around getting this building done, I thought was fascinating. And at that time, we actually had a librarian who chronicled the construction of this building, and he actually took photos from when the construction began to when the construction finished. And he used to give kind of like a historical library instruction to students. And I would sit in on those classes, and it was fascinating to learn, to kind of learn everything about this building and to also learn about some things for Meister too.
I mean, what can you tell me specifically about your first memories working in the new library?
Yes, I can tell you. Yes, I can tell you about my first memories. So I remember, students not knowing if I was a student or if I worked here. That was interesting. I remember how crowded it was. It's always very crowded. There were students in here constantly. Of course, there were times where there were like more students than other times, but it was always kind of buzzing. I remember long lines at the reference desk, if you could believe that. I remember those lines were long, and we would need minimum 2 librarians out at the desk. And sometimes we would call in for a third. So the lines were very long, especially in the beginning of the semester, but I came to understand that was a normal thing here, where it would get pretty crowded in the beginning at the reference desk because students needed their textbooks, and they didn't know where to go. And then they also had questions about other things. They had questions about, hey, where's the bookstore? Or, where's, like, where do I go for lunch? Or, things that, we had to provide some sort of answer for that too. So we were kind of providing library information as well as college customer service. So we did that quite a bit in the beginning of each semester. But I definitely remember those lines were long, and we always needed some backup. I remember doing a lot of one-on-one consultations, and we would use the reference room for that. And the reference room was only used for the consultations. But I remember all of us had a lot of one-on-one consultations, which was usually my favorite way of working with students anyway. I remember, because it was so crowded, the setup of the building, it's kind of like this one room. I mean, it's literally the reading room. That's I forget the proper name for it. It's named after a couple, but it is a reading room, that main room there. And because it's a room, and once a room gets full of people talk, and so it could get a little loud. And I remember we had to make announcements for people to keep their voices down, and that was constant, especially during testing time. So I remember it was just extremely busy. I remember before we would enter the library, it was pretty crowded downstairs. I remember when we would come in before the library opened, there would be groups of students waiting downstairs, and sometimes it would fill up the lobby of students waiting to get inside the library. So it was just it was a place that was heavily utilized. And students knew that they could get a lot of help here. So it wasn't just a lab, and it wasn't just a place where they could get their books. They could talk to people who could actually tell them other things about the campus that they just don't know yet, because they might be just starting the semester. This might be their first time at a college. Or they might be back after many years, or, they just don't know all the parts of the campus. So we kind of had to learn the campus. And coming in when I came in, and I was new, I was learning the campus as well. And from questions that I was asked, I learned more about the college, because I needed to be able to answer some of those questions. And of course, I learned more about the library too, through the questions. I mean, I would say that first year I was here, where I was a sub, and then I moved on to another library, I just learned so much. It was so eye-opening to me. It was challenging, it was scary, it was fun. It was just a lot going on. And that was my introduction. I was it felt good. It felt like I was part of something that was really important, really useful. And so, and the building itself, how it looked, the way it looked walking into this place every day, was lovely, really, really lovely. And it, to me, it remains one of the best buildings on campus with the best like facilities. Yeah, so those are the things that I remember. Nothing specific, but I remember like kind of those broad aspects.
Like getting very like tense at first, overwhelming, and even like the student load. Did the student load dissipate over time, like pre-COVID, of course, but like did you?
Yeah, it kind of, you became accustomed to the ebb and flow of every semester. And so in the beginning, it was super crowded, long lines, and not just at reference desk, there were long lines at circulation. And a lot of times there would be this crowd and you had to ask people to stand to one side. We used to have I forget the name, like we had this thing that would like kind of guide people to make a line along the side so they wouldn't crowd the center area. I mean, just night and day from today. So it was like it certainly was overwhelming, and it was a lot at that time, especially in the beginning of the semester. And then as the students get their textbooks and they get the required readings for their classes, or sometimes they don't get it. Sometimes we don't, there are times we don't have what they need. And so we refer them elsewhere. They can do a CLICS, they can do an ILL. But once that beginning part moves on, once you get further into the semester and you start to go into get closer to midterms, then that becomes the point where students are coming to you for heavy research. And that is a smaller amount of students. Still a lot, but it's smaller. Sometimes there were still lines at that time, but not as much as the very beginning of the semester. But there were a lot of students coming to us back then for reference help for their research assignments. Then that would dissipate as you got closer to some of the holidays. And then towards the end of the semester, you had the reading day and then you had finals. And then after that, it's like dead. Once the winter break starts, we're here every day. And you might get one or two students coming in, but students weren't coming in during their break like that. So that crowd would dissipate, at that time. There were also certain times of the day that were more popular and certain days that were more popular. Thursdays, we had Common Hour, which is really, I think, 2 hours. And this place, you couldn't find a seat. It was just packed. You couldn't find, students would come in here to use the computers. There would be no computer available. So those were times where it was really, really, really crowded. And then times where we had less students was, of course, kind of like when we got into the evening. And then when we got towards closing, it would be less students. It was a good amount, but less students. So there were, there was also an ebb and flow to the day. Weekends were slow and empty. We had more students than I could say we have now on weekends, but it was generally not too many students that would come in on weekends. And working that year is how I got to know the schedule of when students are here more, when they're here less, and you just get used to that routine as you stay here. And you can anticipate when there will be more students, what their needs are at the times that they come to you. And then a lot of assignments are repeated. So you kind of get to know what assignments are for what. And sometimes several students from a class for one assignment will come to you. And it's like, oh, yeah, I can help you with that. So yeah, there are times it dissipated and it just depended.
It's a good explanation of your academic role. I want to talk more now about sort of the extracurricular role you think the library plays and the specific impact it has on BCC's community.
Ooh, good question. Um, I think it provides a place for just like a location for students to hang out. Uh, you know, of course, we like encourage like not talking loud, or but just as long as your conversations don't disturb other students who are studying, it's fine. So it's a place where students come and they might go upstairs and sit in the chairs and just kind of talk and hang out for a little bit, and share stories amongst each other. And then it's also I think kind of it's a building that gives a different vibe, I think, from the other buildings on campus. Um, it's I use the word intimidating a lot, and I think it can be. I think it can be because, the structure is kind of modeled after after a library in Paris. And students don't know that unless you tell them that. But they do understand that this is a different kind of building that probably requires them to behave differently. Um, uh, I think I think students appreciate having a space to go to decompress, a space to go to where they can talk to people without having to create an appointment. And I don't mean talk to people in terms of spilling out their guts and telling us what's going on, which again, I tell you, sometimes that happens. And it's important to understand that the students' experiences, will inevitably influence how they learn, what they want to learn, how they engage with you, and how you should respond accordingly. But I do think that there is an appreciation that they can step in, and if they happen to have a question for something, they can come up to one of us and just ask us. And it can be about anything regarding the campus. And if we don't have the answer, we can help them figure it out, which then helps us, because I know for me, that was the way I just learned so much about BCC, being in this building and working with the students. So I feel as if I feel I could say that, about the students in terms of extracurricular stuff. It's a place for them to come, and be with their classmates. And then, it's a place where I hope it creates a sense of community and some sort of belonging to them. I think it's also a place that encourages um encourages education, like encourages them to like sit down and do your work, because the space is literally designed for that. And it doesn't have to be schoolwork. It could be work that they're personally interested in, starting a business, which I've encountered students who are interested in doing that, looking up careers. I've encountered students who are interested in doing that, and they'll come here and they'll sit and take their time and do that. So I think that this library and this space has been able to offer that to students, that perhaps might not be so easily attainable from being in um, being in the other uh, buildings on campus, that might have pockets that are designed for community gathering, but our whole building is kind of designed for, at least the library is kind of designed for that kind of gathering. And I think that's appreciated with the students.
How effective do you think the building has been like throughout COVID? I know like you were talking about socialization being like a massive component of librarianship, creating community and nurturing that. Like COVID has created a dominant need in society for socializing with others and feeling like you're a part of something. Do you have any like stories, or I mean anonymous of course, like of students coming to you, or even like other like staff members just, trying to start things?
Can you rephrase the question?
Sorry.
Repeat the question for me.
Yes. After like 2019 and especially lockdown in 2020, like there has been like a need for like nurturing community. How do you think the North Hall has stepped in to fill that void?
Okay, thank you. I was paying attention, but I'm like, community and the building and COVID. That's hard because we were home. it was it was tough for this library building to do that. I mean, because once COVID hit, physical spaces were just being re-examined. We tried our best to maintain to maintain some sort of degree of open hours in the library when COVID began. We did provide access to the library via appointment, so it was more strict. And there might have been a level of frustration with students because it's a lot easier to just walk into some place as opposed to now needing to make an appointment to gain access. So I can't say we developed community with students when COVID hit in the physical building. The library itself, us, the librarians, the work that we do, all of it now moved online. There was a significant portion of it already online. So a lot of the stuff we were used to doing online already. When students were coming to us in person, we always referred to them to our resources that were online and other resources. So in that aspect, we were prepared. But everything that the students needed from the building that they received, they weren't able to get, a place to come and sit that had tables and desks and chairs and stuff. So we tried to provide that, online with open Zoom reference calls. And then also we increased the Ask a Librarian chat service to try and move this community we had in person into a comfortable community online for the students that we used to see every day. It was really hard. It was really difficult dealing with figuring out how to, serve the students in the best ways that we could while going through everything around us. And if that was hard for us, we knew it was double and triple difficult for the students that we worked with too. So I can't say anything to the physical building when we shut down. I hope that others that you interview will have a better answer for that. But we did try to create a sense of belonging with our students online and with each other. I mean, we were so separated. So Zoom is all we had, and seeing faces or just hearing voices was nice. So doing that from time to time was comforting. So we had to move this physical building online as best as we could.
Yeah, I mean, half of my education was my graduate was completely online.
Was like, yeah,
It's hard for people. Yeah.
yeah.
So we can get into just some concluding thoughts. Kind of looking back, kind of, a panoramic of your life experience, career experience, educational experience. How do you think that the impact of your work, how has it made on you personally and on your own thinking?
I think this work has helped me to be a more compassionate person. And I think this work attracts certain people who may already have some sort of compassion for others. But that just kind of grows as you do this work. I think it's opened my mind to the different experiences that people have. And while I understood that, everyone's different, and we all come from varying backgrounds, again, knowing that and then being faced with it every day through, stories that students tell you, through the different challenges that students tell you that they faced, successes that they've had, successes they hope to have. Getting to hear about that and kind of absorbing that from the community has helped my thinking kind of expand. And then I also don't make assumptions anymore when I am approached by students, as well as the faculty here too, because we do serve faculty as well and staff also. So I don't make assumptions about what the individual may want from me. I now understand that what that individual is bringing to me, I need to make sure that I'm present and really listening, which I think with my education, you go through activities that kind of instruct you to, of course, like you have to ask questions to understand what your patron needs, those very basic foundational things that you learn. And then when you get into the field and you start working with people, that kind of changes. And sometimes it doesn't always work. And so, you don't want to play 21 questions with a frustrated student. You kind of sometimes have to, I don't know, you work in this long enough to kind of get a sixth sense a little bit for what someone might need, but they're not saying, which may not even be library resources. They just might need to tell you something that's happened to them, and they, and they're crushed and they just need a little encouragement. But also it might be a moment where they really can't find something or they don't understand something, and you kind of show them different ways of attacking whatever challenge that they're facing with an assignment. And so I think it's helped me with broadening my thinking about people. It's helped me in being more flexible and understanding the need for that. And I understood that before COVID. Then when COVID happened, flexibility was the name of the game. And, after COVID, that's kind of what we're living with. I'm sorry, I misspoke. COVID is still with us. We are still in the pandemic. After quarantine, that kind of flexibility is still necessary when working in this position, and then also working with, the library community. I know I talk a lot about working with the students, but we do work with the staff and other faculty too on like special projects, and being able to be flexible with that is important as well. Also, again, not having assumptions with any of our colleagues that we work with and do projects with, and also being open to learning about new things within this field that might come from somebody outside the field. So sometimes a faculty member might ask you about something that they want to work on and they want you to help them with. And maybe that help involves the creation of a library resource. And it's on a topic that you may not be familiar with within librarianship, and then you begin to learn about it. And so I think like that's how, being in this profession, going through the education and being in this profession has changed my thinking, or at least modified it, and shown me how I can grow within this field. It's really nice to feel like you're a part of something. And I think there's definitely that feeling here. at Bronx Community College. There's that feeling in this building, which is so beautiful and has a really nice history. And so I enjoy that. I admire being here, and I like it.
Okay.
I wish I had more words, but I'm not a words person. So
No, that's perfect. Those are the appropriate amount of words. Thank you. Yeah, I just want to say that thank you very much for sharing with me your experiences and sharing with the library for this event.
thank you for doing this. It's such an honor to be part of this project. And really kudos to you and Cynthia for
And
working on
Nelson
this.
and
Who else? Tell me who.
Nelson Santana. It's a group effort between all of us.
Oh, okay. Thank you to, to the group that, is working on this and, commemorating the building. But also it gives us a chance to kind of talk about BCC memories, which I think is also important too. So thanks so much for this.
Thank you. Take care.
You too. Have a good day.